Hey, Larken Rose here. I wanted to quick make this video to let everybody know that I am a terrorist. I'm not exactly kidding either. But what's a terrorist? If the word terrorist brings to mind the idea of somebody who's willing to destroy private property and harm innocents to serve some political agenda, I'm definitely not that. Not at all. I absolutely believe in the non-aggression principle, where the only time force is justified against other human beings is to defend against aggressors. If somebody attacks you, you have the right to defend yourself. You don't have the right to be an attacker. I've talked about these things 8 million times. But how could I possibly be a terrorist if that's the case? If I only believe in force when it's defensive? Well, according to government psychopaths, the word terrorist means anybody who advocates the use of physical force or violence. They don't make the moral distinction. Illegal violence to serve a certain political belief or agenda. Now, mine is actually all the way anti-political, but I'll give you an example. If government decides to go door to door disarming Americans, I would very much be in favor of people forcibly resisting that, up to and including shooting government agents who show up to just randomly disarm people. I would absolutely believe that. I would absolutely advocate that. Pretty high likelihood I'd do it myself. I might lose my guns in a boating accident instead, might just hide it somewhere. But if it came down to it and my choices were to illegally shoot a Fed or a cop trying to randomly disarm me and my neighbors, I would absolutely advocate that. And by their crappy, insane definition, that would make me a terrorist. Because their definition isn't about somebody advocating force or violence that's immoral. Their definition is just about people advocating force or violence that goes against the arbitrary bullshit they made up. In other words, it's illegal. So, for example, all the people engaged in the American Revolution, by their definition, would be terrorists. The U.S. was a British colony. Its rightful government was the British Crown. King George III saying you have to do this, you have to do that. It was a literally criminal terrorist act for people to forcibly resist the redcoats. That's by their definition of what the term means. That's what it is. There are a number of situations in which I would absolutely advocate and engage in violent conflict with thugs of the state, which they would call illegal, because of course they do that. Every tyrant does that. Every tyrant calls his oppression law and calls resistance to his to his immoral aggression crime and breaking the law. How dare you resist when we do fascist bullshit? It's happened in every historical tyranny you can think of. Anybody who resists that is a criminal and a terrorist. So, yeah, I'm a terrorist by their definitions. And if you're not, you're kind of a pathetic human being. Because what that means is government and political psychopaths can do absolutely anything, and there is no point in which you would actually resist. You would just put up with all of it. If they're hauling your neighbors away for having some opinion you don't like, if they're violently, randomly disarming your neighbors, if they decide anybody critical of anything the government's doing should be interrogated, maybe arrested, maybe hung on the spot. If at some point you don't advocate the forced resistance to that, you're a pansy and a wuss and a waste of space. Sorry, that's just my personal opinion. And the only other option is you're a potential terrorist, because they're going to call it terrorism and crime when their immoral laws are resisted by moral human beings who say, we're not going to allow your immoral laws, even if you declare us to be criminals and terrorists. As a result, we don't care because morality matters, and the arbitrary dictates of these political assholes doesn't. Nobody has any obligation to put up with any of that crap. So I'm not what jumps to mind when most people hear the word terrorist, but I very much am within government's definition of what would be a terrorist, somebody who advocates illegal violence against state thugs if the state thugs commit violent immoral aggression. Then there's the other kind of terrorist, which describes the IRS, the use of violence and the threats of violence to serve a political agenda. And it describes the DEA, and it describes the ATF, and it describes the FBI, describes the CIA, describes the entire federal government, describes state police, describes local police, describes every single person who acts as a thug for the ruling class, because all of them, by definition, are using violence to make you go along with whatever arbitrary bullcrap the ruling class decides to call law. They're not just limiting it to, well, if you try to murder somebody, we'll stop you. If somebody did that, good. I'd be all in favor of that. Yeah, stop murderers, please. Don't be murderers like the U.S. ruling class is. So government is always, by their own definitions, terrorists using violence to serve a political agenda. That's what government is. Except they add something to the definition, which is the word illegal, or they call it unlawful. Because if you advocate lawful, as in legislated by the ruling class, violence to serve a political agenda, then you're just government. But all legal means is government approved. So if you actually have a brain and think about it, it's literally a bunch of terrorists saying, if you use violence against innocent people, you're a terrorist, except when it's the violence that we in this organization calling you that approve of. It's just as stupid and insane as if one street gang said, we're going to describe terrorism as any gang that violently attacks innocent people, except ours. When we do it, by definition, it's not terrorism, even if we're doing the exact same thing. But we're just going to define it to exclude ourselves. That's literally what government does in its definition of terrorism, because there isn't any other way to make what they do not fit inside the definition. They literally just accept when we do it. That's what it means when they throw in the thing of, well, it has to be illegal or unlawful. All that means is not approved by us. Anybody who does this nasty stuff is a bad, bad person, except when we do it, which is all the time and constantly. We murder people, we torture people, we violently assault people and rob people, we threaten force all over the place to serve our political agenda. But we in the federal government are not terrorists because we wrote the definition, and in that definition, we included the part about except when we do it. And that's the only reason they're not in the definition. So every government is absolutely a terrorist by nature of what government is, except that when they write the definition, they put in the little except when we do it part. But every decent human being at some point will be a terrorist by government's own definition if there's any point at which you will forcibly resist injustice committed by thugs of the state. Because the moment you resist anything, doesn't matter what it is. It can be get on the cattle cars. It can be, I'm not going to stand next to that ditch while you shoot me in the head. Well, then you're a terrorist. If you resist government, by definition, that is force and it's illegal because those aggressors are the ones who just unilaterally declare what's legal. So yeah, I'm a terrorist. I absolutely believe in the use of physical force to prevent immoral aggression, even when people wearing badges do it, even when the immoral aggression is called law. By their crappy definitions, that makes me a terrorist. So yeah, if you want to put that label on me, be my fucking guest. Now, I don't at all believe in threatening or harming innocent people, unlike every single person who works for government. I believe in using force only against actual aggressors. But you know, a lot of the time the aggressors have badges and work for the state, the immoral aggressors. And people have the right to defend against that. even though the aggressors are going to call that crime and terrorism and we got to crack down on people not just passively allowing us to abuse them. Because it's a crime and it's terrorism for you to not just passively allow political psychopaths to do whatever the fuck they want to you. Because they make up the definition and they decide that the definition of crime and terrorism is anybody doing anything to forcibly resist the evil shit that ruling classes do on a regular basis. Murder some people in a boat, that's not terrorism because we put that thing about except when we do it in the definition. Constantly rob people, kidnap people who haven't threatened or harmed anybody, for immigration laws, for drug laws, for gun control laws, for all sorts of stupid, immoral reasons. That's law enforcement, and you're supposed to just accept at face value that whatever the politicians scribble down and call law, well, that must be legitimate, and anybody who disobeys or resists must be a horrible person. That's why you have such a negative connotation of the terms criminal and terrorist, when those terms do not mean somebody who victimized an innocent person. I am not a fan of people who victimize innocent people. And more often than not, it's government agents doing that. But if you think the terms criminal and terrorist just refer to people who actually harm innocent people, it's because you never thought about it. You accepted the statist paradigm made up by power-happy psychopaths that want you to have that connotation to those terms. Yes, I'm a criminal. Yes, I'm a terrorist by their bullshit definitions, because I believe in the right of self-defense, even when the aggressors have badges, even when some slimeball psychopath somewhere in a room wrote down some words and said, well, now they're allowed to commit aggression against you because you had the wrong plant, or you had the wrong gun, or you said the wrong thing, or you didn't pay enough tribute to the ruling class. We've declared it to be legal to commit violent aggression against you, and have declared it to be a crime and maybe even terrorism for you to resist. So yeah, if you haven't thought about this before, as most people have not, you probably need to think about it enough to come to grips with the fact that you have two choices. You're either a pathetic wuss and a slave, or at some point, you're a criminal and a terrorist. Those are your two choices. Your only two choices. Now, don't be the kind of terrorist that harms innocent people or threatens innocent people, because that sucks. That would make you as bad as government, which does that all the time. But do be an advocate of defending against immoral thugs, whether private thugs or government thugs. And just think about it until you can be at peace with the fact that to be a moral, decent human being requires you to be a criminal, and by their bullshit definitions, a terrorist.
You can control a man for a period with brute violence, but you cannot truly own a man unless he thinks your word is law and that he must obey, and is virtuous for doing so.